So I'm Linda Illingworth. I'm the registered dietitian for Life Wellness Institute in San Diego Sports Medicine. And can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Can
I
I get the
can.
thumbs up? Okay, good. All right, make sure that part's working. And today we're going to talk about the Mediterranean diet. So you may have been dabbling in this or read a lot about it, and there's been a lot in the news lately about it. And so I'm going to share with you the ins and outs of it. And so how about we get started?
Okay.
Sounds good.
So the Mediterranean diet is also called the Medi diet for short. And so today we'll talk about the health benefits. There are specific foods that we want to include, and there's certain foods we want to avoid or minimize in the diet. And there's also some really interesting special principles about the diet. And so those are more kind of lifestyle things that are many of you may already be doing or have an interest in, and they do have a big effect on our health as well. So we'll cover those too. So one of the things that we don't talk a lot about is the importance of our diet. And I often start most of my talks with reminding people or pointing out that every molecule in our body is sourced from food. So whatever you're putting in the mouth ends up part of your tissues or as a signaling molecule to tell the body to do something or to not do something. There's very few things we eat that are absolutely have no effect in the body. In fact, I can't even really think of something that wouldn't have some effect of some sort. So it is really important what the quality of the food we put in to our bodies. And we see that when we're looking at these um, death and disability studies, that 26% diet is attributed to 26% of the risk factors for death and responsible for 14% of adjusted life years lost to disability. And that those are significant numbers, meaning you have a lot of control over your health and longevity with what you're consuming. There's also great evidence that ultra processed foods increase all cause mortality, and that for every 10% increase in an ultra processed food, which is something that like fast food, things that don't have fiber, many antioxidants, vegetables that no longer resemble themselves, like a veggie stick, something like that, puffed ones, like the chips. But for every 10% increase in those types of foods, we see a 14% increase in all cause mortality. So these are some pretty big numbers. And always like to point out that, first of all, your diet is important, and that's where some of the power of this Mediterranean diet comes in. There's two large studies that really were the foundation for this Mediterranean diet. And one was the Predimed study, which is a multi-center, long-term, double-blind controlled study in Spain. So it was a very well put together study. And also the Lyon Heart study. And Lyon Heart study has had a lot of years of follow-up as well. So if you Google those or want to learn more about those, you'll get more of the background about key aspects of what we're talking about today. So the health benefits are numerous. I think this is what's so astounding, even to me as a dietitian. Like, what the heck? This is really pretty powerful when you look at the whole package of this. So what we see is about a 50 to 70% lower risk of recurrent heart disease and or cardiac death. Um, we see lower blood lipids across the board, cholesterol, LDL. The quality of the LDL molecule is improved as well, so it's less likely to be oxidized. Lower blood pressure. We see a healthier gut microbiome, and that's the healthy bacteria that live in the intestinal tract that are so important to our immune systems and our mental health, we're finding out. And the Mediterranean diet also improves cognitive health, and it might improve Alzheimer's. So we're not sure that there's a lot going on with Alzheimer's, so the jury's out on that one, but good indication so far. We also see an increase in longevity. So 15 years of the Mediterranean diet equated to about a 2-year increase in lifespan, and those were healthy years, not years you were miserable. So that's how we want to age well. Um, Also significant improvements in rheumatoid arthritis. So this bodes well for all autoimmune diseases then. We kind of use rheumatoid arthritis often as kind of the marker for hypothyroidism and lupus and other autoimmune disorders. So this anti-inflammatory factor is really what we think is most important there. And seeing that decreased inflammation and oxidative damage um, helps immensely. there's some really interesting data too on against cancer. So when we're looking at the Mediterranean diet for cancer, and we start on the opposite end of the spectrum and we look at a pro-inflammatory diet pattern. So that would be the standard American diet that has a lot more processed foods in it. And what we found is that it does influence a more inflammatory diet, influences the incidence and severity of the cancer. And we see a 25% increased risk and a 67% increase in mortality the more inflammatory the diet is. So this would be in, say, we usually break these study groups into quartiles. So in the highest quartile of the most inflammatory diet, that's where we're seeing these numbers. And we see some pretty significant increased risk odds for things like bladder cancer at 97%, 46% for endometrial, 71% for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, the gastric cancers, 135%, 40% for colorectal, and twice the risk of recurrent breast cancers. So diet really can play a huge role in influencing cancer cell growth. And again, we feel a lot of this is through the anti-inflammatory actions. You may have seen an article recently too about COVID-19 and that a less inflammatory diet quality is how they referred to it. So more fruits and vegetables. So in the highest quartile of people consuming the most fruits and vegetables, there was a 9% less risk of COVID-19 and a 39% less risk of hospitalization due to COVID-19. And again, that's just having those micronutrients on board. Many of the, we often think about carbs and protein and fats, and maybe B vitamins, but we often don't think about things like minerals, things that we need in very small quantity, that if we aren't eating the right foods, we don't get those. And selenium is one good example. Zinc is another that people have become more familiar with through the pandemic. And we'll see higher intake of those in a less inflammatory diet that has more fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, etc. And also, we also see double these risks in lower socioeconomic groups. So when we see that they don't have funds or access to food, um, food insecurity, that really increases the risk of not having a high quality diet, just about doubles it. So, we have to be thinking too about college students that are making up a big part of that. College students living on tight budgets, and malnutrition is not uncommon among college students as well. Okay, so hopefully some of that data convinced you and showed you the importance of and the value of what we're seeing from the results of the Mediterranean diet. So what exactly is on the Mediterranean diet? So the Mediterranean diet is broken up into foods to include daily and foods we would include weekly. And so there's things we want to be sure that we're getting in our diet every day, and that would be fruit and vegetables. Probably you could guess at that. And we want to see 3 or more servings of fruit per day, and not fruit juice, but the whole fruit. Now, people might say, wow, that's a lot of fruit or that's a lot of sugar. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about unraveling the carbohydrates in a few slides. But fruits are packed with antioxidants. And if you aren't eating those, you aren't getting the antioxidants. So anytime we cut out a food group, we also cut out a significant number of nutrients. So if we're eating whole fruit, we're finding that that does not affect blood sugar adversely. Whole fruit is combined with fiber and again the antioxidants. And usually, if we're eating carbs in the context of a meal, that also affects things like the glycemic index, which we're going to talk about as well. Vegetables, 4 or more servings a day. Again, antioxidants, fiber, micronutrients, good sources. Herbs, trying to incorporate those daily. Now, that's something we don't do very well in the quote unquote American diet. So it's something to think about pushing more of those into your diet using things like pesto, keeping the little frozen cubes of basil. You can buy them they almost look like little fish food, cubes, but you can buy those, keep those in the freezer, and you can pop those little chunks of basil into soups or stews. These are easy ways to boost the intake of herbs, which are packed with antioxidants. Just a couple of tablespoons of herbs has more than a cup or two, or is equivalent, actually. Basil is equivalent to kale in many ways as far as the number of antioxidants and amount of antioxidants it provides. So roasting things with rosemary, snipping herbs, parsley into your salads, things like this. So just learning to use herbs more frequently is a key piece of the Mediterranean diet. Whole grains, 4 servings a day. So we aren't really looking at huge amounts here. So we've seen some of the older advice or other advice where we want to, it's recommended to get 9 to 11 servings of whole grain per day. And that's really not what we're seeing in the Mediterranean diet. So a serving is about a half a cup of cooked grain or a whole cup of pasta, just because pasta has a lot of air space. But 1 cup of cooked pasta fits on a plate that's like a side salad plate, and that's an appropriate portion. We want to see less breads. We want to see less refined flour products. So we want to see things like quinoa, brown rice, farro, millet, um, even whole corn. Um, so really trying to eat the intact grains is the best way to get those if you can, or minimally processed into whole grain breads or cereals like granolas and things like that. Yogurt falls under the dairy category. So we have daily to weekly. So yogurt can be consumed daily. It's a great source of calcium, protein, and probiotics. So this is where um, many ancient diets have great sources of probiotics. So we're looking at things like kimchi, fermented foods essentially, kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurts, things that were naturally fermented with the bacteria from the air and that our ancestors ate for years. That was how they got a lot of their probiotics. Again, we don't see a lot of that in our diets unless you're choosing those foods specifically. So if you don't tolerate dairy products, that's absolutely fine. You can live a life absolutely perfectly healthy without dairy. You could do a non-dairy type of yogurt, or you might omit this category. But then we're going to look for fermented foods from other areas, or take a probiotic supplement. And one of the key things we want to talk about dairy is that we are looking at pastured animals. So dairy cattle, beef cattle, these are animals that should be raised on grass from birth to sacrifice, and grain really isn't a natural part of their diets. So quality of the dairy products is also something that we are looking at in the Mediterranean diet as well. So looking to buy dairy products from pastured animals would be a good option. And surprisingly, you might see 4 tablespoons of olive oil here and think, what the heck, that looks like an awful lot. But 2 to 4 tablespoons of olive oil can give us a lot of that great omega-3. It also helps provide satiety that helps us feel full when we're trying to reduce our carbohydrate or simple carbohydrate intake per se. So as you notice, like we talked before about 4 servings of whole grain, many of us would put that on our plate in one sitting. If we've had 2 cups of rice on a dinner plate, that's 4 servings in one meal. And what we want to see is those servings kind of spread out. So when we don't have as much, say, of that refined or processed carbohydrate at a meal, or grains in general at a meal, then adding a little more fat helps us feel full. The omega-3s found in olive oil are found to be very heart protective and protective against weight gain. So these fats are handled a little bit differently than industrial oils, than saturated fats. And so you can feel comfortable adding this into your diet. As long as the total calories meets your fuel needs, it's a healthy thing to do and part of the Mediterranean diet. So weekly, what should we get? So that's kind of those are the foundational foods for daily. Then we can also add in things like nuts and seeds, 3 or more servings a week. Now, if you are more plant forward, you're vegetarian or vegan, you might want to add nuts and seeds daily. But you want to be sure at least you're getting them 3 or more times a week if you aren't eating nuts now. So, and that can be any nut. Brazil nuts, we'll all take peanuts. Spanish peanuts with the red skin on them are probably your best choice because of that red skin has antioxidants in it. Walnuts, pecans, and almonds. And I'll say that again because people always ask me which order. Walnuts, pecans, and almonds are the highest in omega-3 and the 3 healthiest nuts, we think. So if you want to include those, rotate them through on a daily basis. That's great. Seeds are fantastic too. Flaxseed, hemp seed, sunflower seeds. We don't use a lot of seeds, many of us, but working those more into our diet, sprinkling them into dishes, sprinkling them on top of vegetables, into salads. Love hemp seed on top of a soup. So there's really great ways to add those in, and the benefits are you're getting the plant-based omega-3 and the fiber that's so important in the Mediterranean diet. Seafood, we're looking at wild caught primarily. We have concerns about farmed fish across the board not being as healthful. Again, it's kind of equating to a cow standing on a CAFO or a concentrated animal feeding operation where they don't get to roam and they aren't doing what they should do naturally. So when fish are confined, they're not doing what they should do naturally, and it does affect the quality of the proteins and the quality of the meat and the animal that we're consuming. But we want to see 2 to 3 servings a week, preferably of the fattier fish like salmon. And tuna, we want to limit that to say once a week, unless it's the smaller tunas that have less mercury. The only two fish, or there's 2 or 3 fish we don't want to eat too, or really eat at all, maybe on your birthday if you absolutely love it, and that would be shark or swordfish. They are 3 times higher in mercury than tuna. So I always like to point that out because we see a lot of that still on the menus around San Diego. And we talk a lot about the tuna, but less about these other fish that we might be consuming more frequently than we should. By the way, if you consume fish daily, I highly recommend that at least once a year you ask your provider to include a serum mercury test, just so you understand and know if you're choosing the healthiest fish you could, or if you need to make some changes. We don't want to see high mercury levels. It's a heavy metal. It's kind of like lead. We don't want to see a lot of lead in the body, so good to check it and be sure that you don't have high mercury if you're a big seafood consumer. Legumes, another really important part of the Mediterranean diet. So 3 or more servings a week. Again, you're more plant forward. You might choose to eat these daily. Legumes are foundational for lowering blood pressure, for providing fiber that nourish the gut bacteria, and a lot of satiety. They are also very low glycemic. They don't digest quickly, so they're a wonderful source of carbohydrate because also the protein that's paired into those legumes, which also really helps regulate blood sugar. Down to the bottom line again, yogurt and cheese, daily or weekly. And again, we want to talk about, those pastured animals. If you aren't, cheese, we want to see a little less frequently than yogurt. Cheese tends to have a higher saturated fat content unless you're purchasing primarily part skim milk cheeses like some of the mozzarellas. So again, even a weekly dose of probiotic would be better than nothing, and you would get that in yogurt. And cheese is used a little more sparingly in the Mediterranean diet. Eggs and poultry, daily and or weekly. So seafood and poultry and eggs also are also just realize that should go over there and that should be, oh, it is, it's right there underneath. Sorry, I'm not reading my own slide. So eggs and poultry, daily or weekly, and again from pastured animals. The poultry does much better, free range, pastured. They get to eat their natural diet, which isn't typically grain. It's leaves and bugs and seeds and things. So again, you can incorporate that daily. Now, portion wise, we're really looking at 3 to 4 ounces of animal protein. Same with fish, although fish being so low calorie, often we can increase that portion size a little bit to 4 to 6 ounces, but right about the size of your palm is a really good size to think about of the right amount of animal protein at a meal. And for yogurt, it would be about a cup of yogurt. And for cheese, the portion size is 1 ounce, which is not very much. So that adds up really quickly. A lot of people are still happy to see that red wine is on the Mediterranean diet. And portion wise, we're looking at about 4 ounces to 6 ounces a day. And that's a recommendation for men. And a year ago, and women essentially, but a year ago, we had higher recommendations for men, 2 drinks a day. That would include two glasses of red wine per day. What we've seen in the recent research is a much higher rate of gastric cancers, and also that the evidence shows that there's more harm to men when they drink 2 or more glasses of alcohol or 2 or more servings of alcohol a day. So last October, the recommendations were downgraded for men to 1 drink per day. And for women, it's 1 drink per day, but not every day. Because the actual optimal amount, if you're drinking, we're not saying you should drink if you're not drinking, but if you do drink, the most benefit for women came at a half a serving of alcohol, which would be 2 to 3 ounces a day. But we can't really make a public health recommendation saying, oh, have half a drink a day. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So the way they translated that is to women up to 1, but not every day. And then hopefully we're averaging out to something that's a little lower in potency for the dose of alcohol for women. But again, I think some of these things too, like alcohol, there's context that's involved that also adds to the Mediterranean diet, which we're going to see in these special circumstances. So foods to avoid on the Mediterranean diet include red meat. There's not a lot of red meat found to be beneficial or really contributing to an anti-inflammatory action in the body. High glycemic foods, so things that rapidly digest to sugars. High saturated fat content. So while we need some saturated fat, we really want to see our fat in balance. So when we're looking at our total fat calories, we want to see about a third of our fat calories coming from saturated fat, about one third coming from polyunsaturated fats, and one third really coming from those strong omega-3 fats. And when those are balanced that way, we have our best health. Highly processed foods, so packaged in fast food, refined sugars, refined flours, industrial oils, and by those I mean things that are not olive oil, avocado oil, maybe cold pressed sesame, walnut oil, things that are very simple oils. They are not combination oils and they're not processed at high heat or with chemicals. So many of the vegetable oil blends, some of the safflowers, the corn oils, the soy oils, we get a lot of those in prepared food. Those are the preferred oils. They're less expensive for manufacturers. They're more shelf stable as well. So when you're turning over your trust to others to prepare those foods for you, they're not always using the same ingredients you would choose if you were going to make those things at home. So that we call those industrial oils because they're just used throughout the food industry. And again, they're not our healthiest choices. Our healthiest choices are olive oil, avocado oil, which has a very similar profile to to olive oil, and keeping oils like sesame and walnut for flavoring, and then trying to just minimize the use of any other oils, including coconut oil. Coconut oil is highly saturated, and even though it is from a plant, it might be a little bit better than, say, saturated fat from lard, but we can still raise our LDLs. We can still affect our triglycerides adversely, and we can still get a bad insulin response if our coconut oil intake is too high. So you want to keep coconut oil to 1 or 2 teaspoons per day, and that can fit healthfully into a diet if you're using coconut oil. And then lastly, processed meats. So those meats that don't really look anything like the animal they came off of, uh, things like pressed turkey, sandwich meats, things like that. We really would prefer you to eat the fresh meat, not the processed meats that are filled with meat glues and really don't have as much of the original healthful nutrients in it that the whole pastured, perhaps, animal would have. So processed meats fit in there too, and that includes sausage, bacon, lunch meats, trying to think what else, in a lot of the cured meats. So we want to minimize those. And when we say foods to avoid, one thing I often caution my patients is there's no essentially bad food. It's just how much of those can we include in a diet and still remain healthy. And people have different tolerances for them. But if you're really trying to turn your health around and really trying to adhere to a Mediterranean diet, I really would recommend that you do stay pretty close to red meat maybe once a month, really limiting high glycemic treats, sweets to once or twice a week, not daily, and really looking at that intake of added sugars that we see through so many of the foods that we purchase. So let's talk a little bit about that glycemic index. So glycemic index, if you aren't familiar, is the rate at which food raises your blood sugar, essentially. And it was a scale that was designed to help diabetics understand their blood sugar reactions to foods. What they've done is they've taken white sugar, 50 grams of it, and assigned it a glycemic index of 100. And then we compare other foods to that standard and figure out where, how, because white sugar raises the blood sugar the highest, the fastest, and then where those other foods fall in line compared to that. So you can Google the glycemic index and you can find many of the major universities, medical schools have these easy, you can just check them, and it's kind of interesting to see that sourdough bread's better than whole wheat bread, and certain things that kind of come out maybe the way, and I won't be a spoiler, I'd like you'd rather you have some fun looking at it. But our lower GI or glycemic index, so we use GI to abbreviate glycemic index, they keep our blood sugar in a healthier range. And so that's a really key piece of this diet. Interestingly, we can modify the glycemic index or load of a meal. So the index refers to individual foods. The glycemic load refers to what happens to a whole meal. So when you start mixing all those foods together, then what happens? And so protein helps lower the glycemic load or reduce the blood sugar effect, the high blood sugar effect of a meal, as does fiber and as does fat. So when you're eating a balanced meal that has carbohydrate, protein, and fat all together, you're going to be in way better shape for blood sugar control than if you have a purely carbohydrate snack like cookies or chips. And one thing I thought was fascinating is the addition of vinegar was also shown to reduce the glycemic load of a meal. So by simply having a good vinegar and oil salad dressing, or putting rice vinegar on tacos or tostadas, which is delicious, or on vegetables, maybe saute with a little, rice vinegar and sesame oil, and start exploring some recipes with some simple ingredients like that, we can start to reduce the glycemic load with all of these things at a meal. So let's take a look too at this making sense of carbohydrate. I wanted to cover this really quickly. Let me see if I can share. Okay. So this handout, I'm going to send you at the end the recording of this and also this handout, and then I think I've got another one that you can look over. But carbohydrates are an essential part of providing energy to the body. They become fuel for every cell, and also can be involved in some structural components and signaling molecules, again, that tell the body what to do and how to do it healthfully. So this is a nice continuum here of fruits and vegetables and legumes and intact whole grains. And as we've talked about before, this is really kind of the basis of this, of the diet. And these are the foods that have the most fiber and the most nutrients to them and the least effect on your glycemic index and on blood
Linda,
sugar.
are you showing a
Lightly
different
processed
screen?
grains come next. These would be things like a whole grain pasta or lightly or whole grain, um, you know, um, like rolled oats is what I'm trying to say. So steamed or steel cut oats, this would be lightly processed, so they're still almost intact. Then we come down to whole grain foods. So these are grains that count as whole when all of the flour that they're made from is whole grain.
You need to forward
And
one
then
screen.
down to refined grains. And these are grains that have pretty much had all the fiber stripped. They've also had a lot of the nutrients stripped when the fiber goes, and they've had to have vitamins and minerals added back by law. And then we have treats and desserts at the opposite end of the carbohydrate scale, and these are going to be the most inflammatory and raise the blood sugar the most. So I just kind of want people to see when we're talking about, what's processed, what's considered still whole grain, and where it kind of shakes out in the glycemic world. So hopefully that's helpful.
Were you showing a different screen?
Okay, so there are also, I won't go through all of these, but I just wanted you to see, and you can go back through the slides on the recording if you'd like to see this again. But these are some of the specific actions of foods, and you could also call this food as medicine, and why we call food as medicine. So the crucifers, which are the broccoli, cauliflower, kale, these things lower these inflammatory markers of TNF alpha, interleukins, um, extra virgin olive oil, which is EVOO, lowers oxidized LDLs and upregulates SOD, superoxide dismutase, and a catalase. So these are all examples of the inflammatory markers that are tested in research that we don't get tested on a typical doctor's office visit ever, really. But this is where we see a lot of silent inflammation. Or if you do feel like you have inflammation, these are things that could be raised that we aren't typically testing. So we would maybe be looking for CRP right down here, so where magnesium can decrease CRP. So this just gives you an example of what these actual foods do and just a smattering of them, so that you can just start to get an idea about how powerful they are when you start to stack this very anti-inflammatory diet. They're really acting on the actual compounds that causes problems. Okay, so let's get into these special principles. So the Mediterranean diet typically is in the Mediterranean region, they're eating foods that are in season and grown locally and a diverse range of foods. Now in San Diego, we have the perfect seasonality to grow food year round. We have a lot of locally grown foods, and we have a diverse range of foods. So this one's pretty easy for us to accommodate. Culinary methods. not as many high heat methods. So we're using moist and lower temperatures. So even though steam is pretty high, but shorter cooking times as well. So we might steam or lightly saute, roasting. These are going to be lower temperatures than saying frying. Frequent intake of home cooked meals. And whoops, I think I got the chat box, clicked that by accident. Let's get back here. Frequent intake of home cooked meals. And I just wrote a comment on this. There was a new study coming out about children and the consumption of processed foods and how much they're actually getting. And that just came out today. If you're eating 4 meals out a week, that's 20%. If you're looking at 3 meals a day, that's about 20% of your meals a week. So if you follow the 80-20 rule, where 80%, we kind of say that in nutrition, if 80% of what you're doing is you're spot on and healthy, the 20% probably isn't going to affect your health to as much a degree. But if you get those reversed and 80% you're eating unhealthfully, it's a guarantee health problem. So frequently cooking home meals is a great idea. Or at least assembling them. If you're not actually cooking them, you could be making salads and things that aren't as cooked but home prepared. Reduced snacking and conviviality, which I love this concept of, breaking bread with family, with friends, and having a lighthearted time. This speaks volumes to our immune systems to have the happiness quotient built in to around our meal times. Physical activities built in, fasting practice. So really being sure that we aren't eating late at night and that we have about 12 hours a night between dinner and breakfast the next day to allow the body to digest the food and also give the GI tract a rest at night. And that's when the immune system does its best work at night when you're sleeping. So we don't want energy going to digestion instead. Ownership of a vegetable garden is also a characteristic of the Mediterranean diet, as is adequate rest. Now, that's something we often feel like we can skimp on, but it's one of the most foundational things for your health is to get adequate rest. So taking time during the day to at least sit down, maybe put your feet up, be sure you're getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep each night. And if you aren't, really start to work on some of those foundational health behaviors that really set you up to have better health. If you aren't sleeping at night, then you're going to be hungrier during the day. And research shows you'll eat about 25% more calories during the day if your sleep is inadequate. And that's because you have to sleep long enough to turn off hunger hormones or to modulate them to a healthy level during the day. So addressing sleep is one of the first things I suggest my patients do. Okay, so let's look at a few strategies. So I am personally not a food prepper. I don't like to set out every single meal for the whole week. One, I'm a food snob and I like to eat different things during the week, as many of you probably do. So I prefer to batch cook. And what I love about batch cooking is I can cook off roast off a bunch of vegetables at once. And I can save those for use throughout the week. I can throw them into a pasta dish on Monday. On Tuesday, I can throw those same roasted vegetables into a salad. And, maybe Sunday they started out as a stir fry. Or they end up into a stir fry. So you can recreate things throughout the week. Vegetable preparation is one of the biggest barriers to cooking at home because of the peeling, the cutting, and the chopping. So a great tip is to buy pre-cut vegetables, and you can get those at Whole Foods or even some of the mom and pop, or actually even at the regular grocery store. I've seen cut up vegetables there, and that can be a big lifesaver. They also have things like butternut squash, peeled and cut up and frozen, so you could always keep it handy. So using, hiring a sous chef by buying them essentially pre-cut for you can really save you time in the kitchen. Sheet pan dinners are also one of my favorites, and there's also a handout I'm going to send you that has links to the sheet pan dinners that you can cook your protein and vegetables all in one sheet. You can make an extra serving, so then you've got lunch or dinner the next day, and you're just not spending as much time cooking. So you aren't having to prepare 3 square meals every day, which kind of gets exhausting. So batch cooking, again, that's where the action is. Simple sauces are a great way to add in herbs and other spices that are highly anti-inflammatory and change a plain vegetable into something stellar. So a delicious chimichurri sauce or something called magic sauce is amazing, and I believe all those links are on the handout. So if you're missing anything, just shoot me an email and I'll be sure that you get what you need. And homemade salad dressings. Can't say enough about make a big batch of homemade salad dressing. It's super easy. It's vinegar and oil, salt and pepper, and you can throw a little fresh garlic or garlic powder in there. And basically that's all you need for a simple, delicious vinaigrette. And if you want to add more herbs and seasonings, you can, and you can find tons of resources online for some really healthy homemade salad dressings. Another way to look at the anti-inflammatory diet is Dr. Andrew Weil's anti-inflammatory diet. Again, you'll see it's stacked very similarly to the Mediterranean diet. He adds a few more interesting twists and turns in there, but you can Google this, you can download his pyramid, and he also has 2 pages that explain each and every one of these levels, and I highly recommend that you take a peek at that too. So these are all the links to the resources I'm going to provide today. And I won't spend time here because I do want to give us some time to get through some questions and answers for you. The Moosewood Inn cookbook, again, these are plant forward sites. As a chef once told me, it's very simple to learn how to cook a piece of chicken or put a steak on a grill. Once you learn how to prepare meat, that it's cooking vegetables that are much more labor intensive and more challenging. And so she would always look for sous chefs that had a good background in or were interested in cooking vegetables. So when we start there, looking at what vegetables we're going to put on our plate and how to make those delicious, then it makes it a lot easier to put a piece of protein with it, which many of us are much more skilled in preparing that, and we don't need to be focusing on that as much anyway. So again, these sites should really help you find some of the recipes that will help you move your diet more plant forward. List of resources if you want to get into some of the cited research. And I'm going to hop into the chat box first, and then if you guys, once we get through some of these, then I will open it up for talk. Okay, so first question, would you please comment on the advisability of sugar substitutes and liquid flavorings for coffee, as well as whether 0-calorie sparkling water is okay? So very good question on, I'm going to try to bring myself back here so we can just, no, it's not letting me see me. Okay, just gonna leave it. I'm in your corner probably. You can see me there. So, oh, I know what I need to do. There we go. That should bring me back center, right? But I do want to find that chat. There we go. Okay. Well, now I've lost it. Okay, well, let's just talk about, I'll find it in a second. I'll find if I make it big enough, I can find it. There we go. Okay, so sugar substitutes. I am not a big fan of chemicals in our food supply. Your body doesn't need any man-made chemicals to survive. It does need plant-made chemicals to survive. But we do need plant-made nutrients, which are what I call, also known as chemicals. So I'm not a fan of Splendas, any of the sugar alcohols, the NutraSweets, because they affect the gut microbiome in a bad way. Also, the non-nutritive sweeteners have been shown to increase neuroexcitotoxicity. Now that's a big, huge word, but what that means is the neurons remain in an excited state. They are not allowed to relax. This could be a big problem if you're on anti-anxiety medication or taking medication for depression, because your medications are trying to allow the nerve endings to send a message and relax. And there's some evidence showing that these types of sweeteners don't, they work against those types of medication, and they tend to keep those nerve cells ramped up. So the only 0-calorie sweetener that I really feel comfortable, well, there's a couple that I feel comfortable with, and that's stevia, which is a dried herb. You can buy it at our garden stores around San Diego and plant it in your yard. It looks like mint, and you could muddle the leaves and put it into your beverages, but you can buy it as a powder, right? And it does, Splenda actually has emblazoned their name on stevia, much to my chagrin, but you can use stevia safely. It lowers blood pressure, it lowers blood sugar somewhat. So it's a healthy way to sweeten things. Now, half of the population tastes stevia as bitter, and that's a genetic trait that can't really be changed. You might be able to learn to like stevia if you taste it as bitter and don't like it. Other sweeteners would be monk fruit, but monk fruit has a very distinct flavor profile, and for many people it tastes way too sweet. So, and there are some others that are natural substances that don't have the adverse effects of, say, the polyols, which is the sorbitols, the erythrotols. They disrupt gut bacteria and they become very popular in the keto world, and they're just really not very healthy for our guts. So hopefully that answers the question. Liquid flavorings for coffee, there are some stevia-based ones, syrups that have, it's a stevia syrup, believe it or not, without, or no, it's a stevia liquid, but it has vanilla and different flavorings. Those are fine to consume. You could also just put cinnamon into your coffee, or buy a flavored coffee is probably a healthier way to go than a flavoring that would have sweetener in it. Now, if we're looking at creamers and things like that, then just look for things that have the least amount and be sure you're looking at the portion size. Because some of the creamers, for example, I've seen oat creamers that have 5 grams of sugar per 2 tablespoons. And I personally use one that has 5 grams of sugar per cup. And that's a huge difference because there's, I don't know how many tablespoons, 8 tablespoons in a cup. So you're going to get a lot more sugar out of a product that has 5 grams per 2 tablespoons, obviously. Let's see. Oh, somebody got different screens. Oh, hopefully, I'm sorry. Hopefully we got you back on track. Are some mushrooms better than others? Yes, so typically we're eating the white mushrooms or the portobello brown mushrooms, which are very healthy. They're great sources of vitamin D, especially if they've been exposed to UV light. So when you buy them, sometimes it'll say good source of vitamin D on the label. That means they've already done that, given them some UV light at the packing shed. If they don't say that, or you buy them in bulk, you can just set them near a window. You don't want them in direct light, but about in 30 minutes, it'll boost their vitamin D content to about 500 international units per cup, and that is not destroyed in cooking. So they're a great source of vitamin D, especially for my more plant-forward people. The Asian mushrooms, however, provide even more benefit. So the shiitakes and maitake, and I recently found a great nutrition hack. There's Sprouts carries frozen shiitake mushrooms. They're cleaned and chopped, and I always have them in the freezer now. They're always ready to go to add to dishes. The Asian mushrooms also have compounds that are beneficial for more antioxidant benefits and also for gut health and also for cancer fighting. So those Asian mushrooms, the more we can move those into the diet. Many of you who don't like, some of the other mushrooms taste a little woody and or earthy. So shiitakes are a really nice way to move into those other mushrooms. Maitake to me tastes a lot more like dirt, and shiitakes taste a lot more like portobellos. So if that helps on the mushroom scale. Is cooking with olive oil beneficial? It can be, and that's a really good question because we've heard a lot about olive oil doesn't stand up to high heat, so we've stopped cooking with it, but it holds up to some heat. We don't necessarily want to be frying in it, but if you're briefly sauteing some vegetables, or you're drizzling it on to roast in the oven, you're going to be okay. Most olive oil has an acidity that can accommodate, that changes how it reacts in heat and can handle some heat. But if that's the only way you ever get olive oil, then we want to be sure you start to get it uncooked, unheated into salad dressings, maybe drizzle, wait and put the olive oil on at the end of cooking with some other herbs and spices, or use it in things like pestos or chimichurris or this magic sauce where it doesn't, it's gently warmed but not heated and preserves more of the beneficial aspects of olive oil. Yogurt, do I suggest full fat, low fat, or non-fat? Excellent question. If you are ramping down your animal product consumption, so if you're not eating as much red meat, processed meat, chicken, or eggs, then we start to move your saturated fat intake comes down. Then you might have room for full fat yogurt. It's all about how much room do you have to add something that has more saturated fat in it. If you are still eating a fair amount of animal foods and things like butter and cheese also, then I would recommend a low fat. You may not have room for additional saturated fat. And I don't like non-fat anything. As soon as it says non-fat to me, if it didn't come from nature, non-fat, I'm not interested in it, because as soon as we take the fat out of milk, now two other things go up in concentration. That would be the carbohydrate and the protein. So we've unbalanced that product to some degree. Low fat, we're still okay, but non-fat, I'd rather you have at least 1% or 2% in your dairy products, or move to the non-dairy products that are made with nuts, and those have a fair amount of fat left in them, and that's a healthier fat. What organic fruits and veggies are worth paying more for? Oh, excellent question. So there's a great app called the Dirty Dozen, and that's put out by Environmental Working Group, and they actually test the produce annually. Actually, it comes from the USDA database, and they're monitoring pesticide and herbicide in our produce. And then the EWG takes the data from the USDA database and puts it into this list. It changes every year. So the things you really want to be sure you're purchasing organic are apples and berries. They have some of the highest pesticide and herbicide residue. Things that have a peelable skin like oranges, lemons, limes, we're not as worried about it. But we did find with apples that the pesticide penetrates the skin. It actually is in the flesh as well. So if you download that app, it's going to tell you exactly which ones you should always buy organic and the ones that are absolutely fine to buy conventionally grown. Stevia, did talk about stevia. Hopefully you didn't miss my comment. Stevia is okay. It actually has some health benefits, so if it tastes good to you, you're good to go. I will caution you, too much stevia can cause gas and bloating, and I've had some patients come to me saying, I have all this gas and bloating, I don't know what's going on, and when we go through their diet, they're having multiple sources of stevia. It can be in a protein powder. It can also be in many of the 0-calorie drinks, and you just might be getting more than your body can tolerate. So just be aware of that. Right after the slide on glycemic index. Oh, shoot. Okay, now I see. Thank you, Margaret, for filling me in on what happened. So I'm going to send you this handout on it's called Making Sense of Carbohydrates, essentially. And when I was talking about fruits and vegetables, whole grains, then the moderately processed grains, refined grains and sweets, it's going to lead you right through that. It's much more interesting than I described it. When you can see it, it'll make more sense. So I will be sure you get that. And do I recommend a specific limit on nut consumption? Really good question. Yes, because nuts are so concentrated in calories, they can contribute to weight gain, even if you feel like you're doing a good job with monitoring that. So usually 1 to 2 ounces of nuts per day, and or seeds is probably about right for most people. Too many nuts can also cause constipation, believe it or not. And so I would just kind of keep it there. If you are, again, more plant forward, then you might find you have more nuts and seeds in your diet. But the key to usually increasing anything in your diet that has more fiber in it is to do it slowly. And then your body has time to adjust and provide and learns to produce more digestive enzymes to handle whatever it is you're consuming. So, so that's what I would say about the nut consumption. Okay, let's see. I'm going to close this down, and then if you'd like to unmute and have a question, feel free to talk away.
Yeah. One question. You mentioned.
And you just have to unmute yourself.
I think,
Don't forget to.
I thought I did. Yeah, it says I'm unmuted.
Still can't hear you.
Turn up and
There you go. Now we gotcha.
Right. Okay. You mentioned whole grains, and I know most of us eat more bread than we should, so forth. You didn't mention buckwheat. What are your thoughts about buckwheat? What to do with it?
Buckwheat. Buckwheat's great. It's one of those ancient grains, and that's what I think, when we talk about, as having been a dietitian forever now, I've seen this nutrition kind of go through our lingo go through these changes. And we've talked a lot about whole wheat, whole wheat, whole wheat. And I think that's to the detriment of all these other beautiful grains that have very different nutrient profiles and that were eaten, they're ancient grains. They were eaten by our ancestors and they had better health in many, many respects. So buckwheat's fantastic. It's more of a seed than a grain. I make a phenomenal buckwheat bread. If anyone wants that recipe, it's pretty foolproof. It's a yeast bread. Has a fair amount of psyllium fiber as an ingredient, so it's fantastic for adding additional fiber. And because of all the psyllium that's in it, it's going to have a much lower glycemic index than a standard bread would have. I still wouldn't recommend eating the whole loaf at once, even though you're probably going to want to when you taste it. But It doesn't make a huge loaf, so just give half to the neighbors or something if you're tempted. But yeah, buckwheat's a great one. Buckwheat is great to make crepes out of for so ways to make like treats healthier or meals healthier that if you want to do something that's fancier. Crepes were traditionally made out of 100% buckwheat flour, not refined flours. So again, kind of moving back toward these more traditional ways of preparing food. The handout I'm going to send you on those carbohydrates, the one you couldn't see, that's from a website called The Old Ways. And they have a lot of other resources about, ancient eating practices and grains and things that we don't consume anymore and the benefits. Someone also asked about sourdough and the red wine. There we go. Okay, so sourdough bread kind of falls under that buckwheat. Sourdough bread has the lowest glycemic index of many of like than whole wheat or white bread even. And we believe the benefits from the sourdough come from that extra fermentation. So again, remember we start sourdough. Sourdough is made from the bacteria that's circulating in the environment, much the way that we used to make, like kimchi and things are made. We don't add probiotics to those. We're taking the actual bacteria that are that's on the produce and letting that ferment. Same with sourdough bread. And so when those bacteria get in there and they ferment, they're helping to break down and pre-digest, so to speak, some of the carbohydrate in a way that is beneficial for humans. So it puts a lower glycemic load on our GI tracts. So sourdough would not have as much fiber, but it would still be more beneficial than wheat or whole grain, believe it or not. Kind of crazy, right? Yeah, it's hard. There's some that glycemic index is a really interesting list to look at. Now, benefits of red wine, one serving a day for men. Did the research conclude that one serving is better than none, but more is harmful? Really good question. No. They said if you are a non-drinker, they don't suggest you start. But if you are a drinker, then the benefits were seen at about one alcohol equivalent for men and a half of an alcohol equivalent for women. And that data can be found. I'm trying to remember, it's the Institute of Medicine, I believe. If you look at the new dietary guidelines, I think it was 2020 dietary guidelines, because it was last October from the Institute of Medicine, you're going to get about a 5 billion page report. And the chapter on alcohol is like 100 pages of its own. So it really is, it's not terrible and too terrible to read anyway. But it'll give you more information about what exactly they found. But one serving a day, many researchers say it's 4 ounces. I kind of err on the other side of the more generous research at 6 ounces. Um, having done this for so long, helping people be compliant is really important, right? And so what's most important too is consistency. Same with exercise. If you're consistent with exercise, you're going to get the benefits than if you just do it once a week. Same thing with food. The more consistently we show up and do the right thing, the more benefit we have. So, if you can keep it to 6, but you can't with 4, you're going to pour 2 more because it's like an appetizer for alcohol. Then I would err on that side of 6. And I also recommend get your favorite glass you like to drink out of, because some of them are more like buckets and some are dainty glasses. And so depending on what glass fits your hand best, use a measuring cup and measure it out so you know where the line is. That also is a really good clue when a restaurant pours you a glass of wine, you'll have a better idea of how much you're actually consuming once you measure it for yourself at home. I actually found out I was short pouring myself years ago. So, which isn't a bad thing either. Any other questions?
I have two questions.
Different.
I have two questions.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Who's the other person? Go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to thank
Question.
you. I have to leave, Linda, so thank you. And I
Oh,
would
you're
love your
welcome.
buckwheat recipe. So
Okay,
Yeah.
shoot me an
Thank you
email
very much.
because I can't
Thank
see your
you.
name. So shoot me an email and I'll send it to you.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much.
Of course. My
Okay,
pleasure.
bye-bye.
Is there any
Okay.
significant difference between the DASH diet and the med diet?
Really good question. There is. The DASH diet had more inclusion of more dairy and is much more focused on sodium content. So the DASH diet's major benefit was blood pressure, lowering blood pressure. And I would say it probably has, well, It does have similar impact, but probably not as broad as the Mediterranean diet. So Mediterranean diet also lowers blood pressure. I think the benefit of the DASH diet might be for people who are sodium sensitive, because some people are much more sensitive to sodium than others. And but we see good results with either one. So whichever one, they're very similar. It's almost impossible to tell them apart unless you're really teasing out the details. But I would say pretty much the DASH diet in their research included more dairy and restricted sodium more so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. For sugar, what about the raw sugar? And then also for breads, you get a lot of breads now that have sprouts in it and other grains. Those seem to be better. But what about hard alcohol? If you're mixing hard alcohol with a juice or something else, is there a limit to that?
Good
And
question.
could you also speak just a tad about the times for eating when you said 12 hours?
Gotcha. Okay, so let's go back to raw sugar, and you're going to have to remind me of the other ones because this has become like a game
Okay.
of the reminder game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need your help. Okay, so raw sugar. I'm a proponent of really eating things most, close to nature. So if you are going to bake something or sweeten something, you do have room for a little bit of added sugar each day. And for women, it's 26 grams, and for men, it's 34 grams. So that translates to 6 teaspoons for women, 9 teaspoons for men. But we pick up a lot of that throughout the day in things like a yogurt, if it's sweetened. A cookie could blow it out of the water in one cookie. So that adds up really fast. 6 teaspoons sounds like a lot until you start to add up the grams in the processed
Right.
food. Raw sugar is no different, really. I would buy it maybe an organic raw sugar, but if you're buying sugar in the raw, that product, that is
Right.
refined sugar with molasses sprayed onto it. So sugar in the raw is kind of a gimmicky thing. It tastes more molassesy because they've sprayed molasses on it. So healthier sugars would be to, you know, most recipes, what I tell patients is, and I do this all the time. If I make cookies, I cut the sugar in half. The cookie will be fine 90% of the time. Same thing with a quick bread, like a banana bread or zucchini bread, cut the sugar in half. It doesn't need all that sugar. Um, and especially if you're using things like applesauce in a recipe that's going to add some natural sweetness. So no great benefit, to any of the sugars, whether it's coconut sugar or refined sugars of any kind or brown sugar. It still needs to stay within 26 grams for women, 34 for men, or we start to see metabolic problems. And then you asked about timing of meals. And so we see the best metabolic health when we have a 10 to 12-hour fast at nighttime. That's just how the human body is designed. We are designed to not be eating fuel after sundown, essentially. The body is trying to prepare for rest and sleep. We are very tied to sunrise and sunset. Our liver and our intestines and our brain all have a different circadian rhythm than our major circadian clock, which is the sunrise to sunset. And the intestines allow more food to be absorbed at nighttime when the sun is down than they allow to be absorbed during the day. And what that tells us is if you're eating late at night, you're going to absorb more fuel from the food you eat late at night than the lunch you had. So it's very important to let that gut have a rest at night and let the blood sugar come down, let inflammation come down, and kind of reset to start the day again, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And then you had two other questions were?
One was about breads with sprouts and things
Yes.
in it, and the other was about hard alcohol in terms of mixed drinks.
Gotcha. Okay, so sprouted grains are always great. We believe when you sprout the grains, it's shown that the proteins are more bioavailable, amino acids are more absorbable. So a sprouted grain bread, something like Ezekiel, is great. But Ezekiel really is only delicious if it's toasted. So by some miracle of food science, they've used no flour. Those are just grains stuck together into a loaf somehow. Um, so yes, sprouted grains. If you buy sprouted brown rice and cook that, it's delicious and you're going to get more nutrition from that. As far as the alcohol question, hard alcohol and beer was not seen to have the same beneficial effects as red wine. And so, but the alcohol equivalents are the same. And so an alcohol equivalent is 4 to 6 ounces of wine, 1 shot, which is 1.5 ounces of alcohol, or one 12-ounce beer. And that would be a light beer, not a craft beer
Right.
with a lot of residual sugar or higher alcohol contents. So that's what they use in research when they're assessing the benefits or the harm. And
Thank
Hi,
you.
I have a couple questions too, please.
sure,
Can you hear me?
I
Yes,
can.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on supplements around exercise, such as like BCAAs in your water or pea protein post workout and things like that.
Okay, so that is like an entire lecture series in and of itself. In a nutshell, um, the best advice is to stack a meal right after a workout rather than relying on sports beverages or products. Protein powders kind of fall in their own category. I don't like protein powders that have vitamins and things in them. You're going to get BCAA, which is branched chain amino acids, in a protein powder. There's not a lot of evidence that most of us need that. In addition, perhaps an athlete whose job depends on it, whose income depends on it, might get 0.5% or 1% better performance, and that will make a difference in a couple $100,000 of their contract, but or more. But for most of us, we don't need that. And the best advice is to stack a meal post workout, and that meal be very balanced. So I'm sorry, it's a lot to get into the
No,
deep.
that's great. Thank you. No,
You're
I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Skim milk advisable? No. I like you to see 1% or 2%. I want some fat in there to balance. Organic Greek yogurt plain. I'm not sure where Kirkland sources their stuff. Remember, every dietitian, nutritionist, healthcare professional has their own biases. I might be one of the few that admits it. So, unless I know who's made it, I don't buy it. I want to know that the people who are doing the animal husbandry are doing the best animal husbandry, because that matters to me, what I put in my body and what becomes part of my cells. So I can't really speak to the value of Kirkland organic Greek yogurt plain. The Greek yogurt plain part sounds great. The organic part sounds great. I can't speak to the Kirkland part. So hopefully that helps. And honey, where does honey fit in? Honey fits into simple sugars, sadly, and I'm a big honey snob, so to speak. I drive up to Trumper's Honey Shack up in Julian, and I get 2 big jars of honey a couple times a year, or once a year, maybe at this point, but I've lost track because of the pandemic. And the beauty of honey is that it has a distinctive flavor, and honeys can taste dramatically different. So I would buy an avocado honey that has a very deep, rich, almost buttery taste to it. And when you're using that instead of sugar in cooking, again, I would still cut it in half, the amount of sweetener. But you're going to get more flavor from a honey than you would say a refined sugar anyway. And we also feel that honey has some B vitamins. We know honey has some B vitamins. And if you use like a teaspoon or two of honey in your beverages throughout the day, you can count that toward that sugar quotient, and it might be more satisfying as well. So if you can still keep that in the refined allotment of sugar, you'll be okay with honey. Brands of yogurt I suggest. Well, you're speaking to a non-dairy dietitian, so I use Kite Hill almond-based yogurt, but I like Strauss Farms. Some of the I want to see a yogurt that is, like I said, low fat or full fat, and I don't want and plain. I really don't want to see sweeteners in it. I would much rather see you put your own fruit in it, and if you need to, put 1 teaspoon of honey on top. That's going to be far less sugar than a manufacturer will manage to cram into a cup of sweetened yogurt. So you're always going to be better off or even putting your own stevia on top if you like stevia. So let me think what else. I'm trying to chop in my head on the brands of yogurt. Stonyfield used to be a really good brand. There's been a little scuttlebutt about, organic brands and who's really sourcing well and doing it well. And I have to say, I'm not up to snuff on that right now. It's been a while since I've read about it. All right, let's see. Anybody else? Did I skip anything? Any other questions? Good questions all the way around. I'm I'm sure somebody has one last question. No?
Okay,
I knew it.
So, long story short, I'm trying to go completely I'll probably never make vegan, but trying to go at least completely vegetarian. I love fish, but I'm looking for alternative, basically plant-based sources of protein or cottage cheese or whatever. So I'm looking for good sources of protein that don't involve killing an animal or a fish. Any suggestions?
Good question. So again, because I'm a food snob basically all the way around, it's not just honey, it's other things. So there's a really good company called Rancho Gordo, and they make some of the best dried beans on the planet. They always cook beautifully, and mainly it's because the how he's growing them, and they're not super cheap, but they're so good, and they last. You'll get a big bag, and they last quite a while. So I would order from them. I usually order once or twice a year and kind of just stock up on garbanzo beans. They have beautiful varieties of black beans, beautiful varieties of many more varieties of beans than I didn't even know existed. So you can really play around with those, thinking about adding things in like hummuses, bean dips. You could use, I think sometimes transitioning to a vegetarian diet, using a vegetarian protein powder that is a pea-based protein is a great help. I'm not a huge smoothie person personally, but I find that in an event that I feel like I'm light on protein or I'm struggling to I don't have time to do the food prep like, everybody else, throwing a smoothie together with with a good protein powder. And one that many of them are very sweet to me. It's kind of the bane of my existence with protein powders. I just found one by Four Sigmatic. And it has a little bit of monk fruit in it, not so much that it makes it so sweet, and no stevia, because I don't do stevia. Tastes bitter to me, unfortunately. And the beauty of Four Sigmatic is it's pea protein, hemp, and pumpkin seeds, and then also has the medicinal mushrooms in it: lion's mane, cordyceps, shiitake. These beautiful mushroom powders that they taste great. They just taste a little bit not even earthy. When you taste it, you won't even know that they're in there, but they have a lot of great benefit to humans. So that's a really great product all the way around. I'm really liking right now.
Available do you have a website?
They do. And it's if you just Google Four Sigmatic,
The number 4 or FOUR?
either way, if you Google it, either way, it'll come up.
And the
They're
other
pretty popular right now.
The other was Rancho Gordo.
Rancho Gordo beans.
Okay.
I've cooked beans for years out of the grocery store, and that's been hit and miss forever. And I think some of it is just they don't cook well. They've been on the shelf too long, or
I've had that.
yeah. So these in an Instapot are foolproof every time.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And for my fish lovers too, there's a great company called Alaskan Seafood Company. I know there's a million of them called that. No, it's called Wild Alaskan Company. I already screwed it up. But they only fish out of this bay that actually the grandfather that started the business, he wrote his master's dissertation on the environmental protections for this particular bay that the family has fished for decades. So this family only ships cod, salmon, 3 types of salmon: cod and halibut, and an occasional things that are probably bycatch like rockfish. And they're flash frozen, and they ship them frozen to you, and they come in individual portions, which makes it really easy. And the quality is insane. So much better than if you're trying to get more fish into your diet, buying quality fish can help you. Just if one bad piece of fish can put you off for weeks. So it's called Wild Alaskan Company, and I can put that in the email. I'm gonna jot that down too.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, it's 10 after 1. You guys probably need to go really eat your lunch if you haven't eaten already and have other things to do. But thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully we'll get to do this again soon.
Thank you.
My
Thank you
pleasure.
very much.
My
Thank you.